Members, we have formed a quorum, and it's time to start our meeting. Please invite the officials to join us, and we have to catch up. This is a 4-hour meeting. At about 4:30, I'm going to let you take a 5-minute break. Matters arising. List of follow-up action required of the administration arising from the discussion at the meeting of on the 27th of June 2017 is CP2 1824/1617 (01), and the government's response to the follow-up issues is at the paper CP2 1824/1617 (02). So when the officials are seated, I'll invite Mr. Chris Sun to respond to those questions. Today, in addition to having Mr. Chris Sun, Head Healthcare Planning and Development Office, and Ms. Natalie Lau, Assistant Secretary for Food and Health, we also have Dr. Jiang Wai-lun from Hospital Authority, Professor Joseph Lau, Chairman of Medical Council of Hong Kong, Professor Anthony Chan, the Associate Dean, the Faculty of Medicine, the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and Mr. Joseph Siu, Deputy Secretary of Department of Health. I must apologize to our guests for having to ask you to sit through a 4-hour meeting, and we would like to get as much done as possible before we proceed to the summer break, and I don't know whether we have time to reconvene in September. Mr. Sun, your response. Yes, we have issued a response paper to members. At the first meeting, the members raised questions about limited registration. Let me highlight some important points in the response paper. First, doctors on limited registration employed by the HA. The HA has always imposed very strict criteria in hiring doctors with limited registration. They have a task force to examine the experience and qualification of the applicants, and the HA will only employ doctors who possess all of the following 3 requirements. First of all, a specialist qualification comparable to the intermediate examination of the colleges of the Hong Kong Academy of Medicine, at least 3 years working experience in hospitals after completion of internship, and ability to speak fluent English and Cantonese, except for the specialties of anesthesia, pathology, and radiology. As we know, there is no specialist qualification system in the mainland of China. So HA will not employ doctors who have not obtained a specialty qualification comparable to the intermediate examination of HKAM. So the mainland doctors will be employed on that basis. Last time, Dr. Chen mentioned that there's a mainland doctor employed by the HA, but that doctor was also a registered doctor in Canada. And last time it was mentioned that the number of doctors on with limited registration hired by the HA seems to be on the low side. We have set out the numbers from 2011 to 12 to 2016-17. Altogether, 390 applications from locally trained doctors have been received, and 276 of them that did not comply with one or more of the 3 qualifications. For 67 other cases, incomplete information or the applications were withdrawn, so they were not employed. Altogether, 35 applications for limited registration were submitted by the HA. So through this channel of employing the doctors with limited registration, this is a very limited channel. Although we can not assess whether the period of limited registration and the extension from 1 year to 3 years, how many more will be attracted to apply? I believe more will be attracted, so it will be conducive to the HA's recruitment of doctors with limited registration. And the 2 universities, their medical faculties have also employed doctors with limited registration for their teaching posts. There's a question as to whether that doctors with limited registration can also offer the services outside the medical faculties. According to the advice given by the DOJ, that this is not allowed, and the 2 universities have never given approval for these doctors to provide services outside of the medical faculties. Under the limited registration law, the doctors with limited registration hired to work for the medical faculties cannot work outside. And for private cases, medical doctors working in the medical faculties can only devote no more than 10% of the time to treat private patients. The universities have clear guidelines and codes of practice to regulate the work of doctors with limited registration and their teaching staff in the service for the private patients. Do members have questions? Yes, Dr. Chen. Doctors are in support of the reform, but we'd like to take the opportunity to clarify some legal issues, and if there are loopholes, plug them. I thank the government for this very detailed paper. CB 21824/1617(02). That's the paper given to us in the second meeting when we had the public hearing. May I refer members to the page 11.
Point number 11, it is said that as of the end of 2016, in relation to the countries concerned, we have a table that is where doctors with limited registration employed by the Hong Kong U and the CHK received medical training. As at the end of June 2017, we have a clear table in relation to the country of origin of these doctors. So about countries or regions where doctors with limited registration receive medical training, what are you actually referring to? Are you suggesting that they have graduated from medical schools in those regions? That is in relation to the medical qualifications they hold. Well, pardon me, but I'd like to pursue this point further. Well, let's say some medical students in Hong Kong studied medicine in the medical colleges in Hong Kong. So does it mean that I fit in this description and the country in the table should be Hong Kong in my case? But if you are a Hong Kong student, then it will not be a limited registration. Well, I just want to clarify the wording. It's not about limited registration. I just want to clarify the description first. Well, Mr. Shun, just now you mentioned doctors with limited registration may have come from mainland China, meaning that they hold the qualification in China. But as you mentioned just now, at the same time, that doctor has also been registered as a specialist in Canada. So I think Dr. Chan's question is actually the following, because it's not, Hong Kong is not included in the table. Right. That's very wise, Chairman. I agree. But let me follow up on this issue. Well, thank you, Chairman, for your guidance. And I'd like to refer members to page 6 of the paper. Now, just now, Chairman raised this point, and this table applies to the HA data. Now, it is not categorized in terms of the country or regions where doctors received medical training, but rather by specialty or discipline. And I'm referring to this table because the former secretary said on TV categorically that the HA does not employ any doctors who graduated in the mainland. But I'd like to refer you to the table, because this is exactly happening. I don't think these two tables tally. About the table on page 11 and 12, and also this table on page 6. I think that these tables do not tally. And I can give you this example. Let's say my friends in the medicine discipline or myself may at the same time take exams abroad or receive training abroad or in the United States. So after taking these exams, will I still be regarded as a local doctor? Well, let's say if I am in the anesthesia specialist, and if I take an exam in Australia, then would I become a non-local doctor as it is put in page 6, on page 6. So I'd like to clarify the point about doctors with limited registration in the case of the CUHK and Hong Kong U and those employed by the HA before we can make any comparison. So I take it that your question is about the first degree that that the doctor has obtained. Where is the country of origin? Are you referring to this question? That's very wise, Chairman, and it is correct. I want to point out, however, that the established practice is to base the categorization on the country where the doctor first obtained the qualification. Well, that's all right, but I'm just trying to follow your logic. Now, I've spelled it out, and your current understanding is that when a doctor obtains a certain medical qualification in a certain country, then that should be the basis. That's also correct, but at the same time, I'd like to compare this table on page 11 and 12 and the table on page 6. I'd like to combine these two together because they're inconsistent. No, because they are describing completely different things. So I wrote to the Bills Committee so that this view can be forwarded to the administration. For the purpose of clarification, I'm not asking additional questions. Well, it's a point of elucidation, so it's fine. You just want to have a better understanding. So can anyone answer Dr. Chan's question? Do you need time to think about it, Dr. Zhang? Let me first explain the categorization adopted by the HA. As mentioned by Mr. Sun just now, there are 3 requirements. That is 3 years of working experience, and the qualification should be comparable to the intermediate examination of the constituent colleges of the Hong Kong Academy of Medicine, and also a language requirement. We therefore have not imposed any requirement on the country or region where the doctor has obtained his medical qualification. The requirement is about the 3-year working experience, and it's on this basis that we formulate this table instead of where these medical students graduate. However, we also provide additional information as to where the first medical qualification was obtained. I am trying to rationalize the information provided by the administration. I have sufficient information, but I don't know how to understand them. I'm trying to combine these two tables, and I'm referring to the same point. And I agree with Dr. Zhang on his view, but according to the Medical Registration Ordinance, Section 14B of limited registration, there should be an acceptable overseas qualification. That is a country where the doctor has obtained his medical qualifications or medical license instead of the specialty. Because, for example, I may have a qualification in Hong Kong, but my specialty qualification might have been acquired overseas or in Australia. So let's say you can graduate from university in Beijing, and then you can get a specialist qualification in Australia. That's right. But the law defines the matter on the basis of where the license is obtained. So if the specialist wishes to practice in Hong Kong, he has to take a specialist exam as well. But never mind about that, right? You're trying to clarify the point. Now, you have provided a paper to members. I haven't read it thoroughly because I have just forwarded the papers to members. I just want to know whether you're trying to clarify the matter with the administration. That's of course, I'm not trying to cause trouble. Nobody's criticizing you for that. I'm just trying to clarify the matter. Perhaps I didn't ask my question clearly. I therefore have reduced it into writing because I'm trying to rationalize and make it more comprehensible for members' reference. Well, I am not going to uphold the 5-minute speaking time limit very strictly. I'm not suggesting that you're not clear. I just want to say that the members, including myself, are not doctors. We may not understand the issue thoroughly. I therefore might be a bit long-winded because I need to further clarify with you. I want to emphasize that local doctors do not mind mainland doctors being employed by the HA to help out, as long as they go through the official examination procedures and the registration procedure, as long as they go through the procedure as intern for a year and after going through the exams, etc. This is already happening in the hospital authority. We don't mind mainland doctors at all. Right, but we're focusing on limited registration. My point is, on limited registration, on page 6 of the paper, as Chairman mentioned just now, it is categorized by way of the specialist qualification, and the doctor was referred to as a Canadian doctor. I just want to clarify this point. The subject of the question, the reasons, and the administration's paper, I'm trying to make myself clear as much as possible. Right, perhaps I'll allow other members to ask questions first, and then I'll come back to you.
都想問翻一啲咧，就其實即係而家最
Dr. K.K. Kwok. Now, it's about whether we can make full use of the system of doctors with limited registration. About the figures in the HA's table, I'm quite disappointed. Because more doctors should be allowed to practice in Hong Kong, whereas ultimately only 30+ applications were received. You have the language and qualifications requirement or the standard. I want to know which is the criterion blocking the applications. For the 300+ applications rejected, I want to know whether it has to do with the level of standard or the qualification requirement, or that they have not been able to pass the intermediate examination. Well, the point is, in the mainland, there is no standard qualification. And even if there is, it is difficult to compare that with the Hong Kong standard. I haven't finished the question. Because you just paused, I thought that you finished your question. Say in Australia, New Zealand, and the UK, the switching is simple because we have similar exams, whereas in the mainland, they do not have such a framework. The system is not intact. The standards might vary a lot in the different universities, and we're also concerned about a lot of incidents. So for those graduating in the mainland, or for those undergoing training in the mainland, how can we align their standards with ours? Otherwise, if the limited registration is put in place, will a loophole be created such that we may be importing doctors with limited registration, not really the doctors that we wish to invite in mind. Now, to put in place this system of limited registration, we would like to address the issue of manpower shortage, and they will be coming here to provide assistance. Whether or not the doctors have graduated from the 2 medical colleges in Hong Kong or have taken the relevant exam, this is the major factor. And we also have retention measures. For those graduating elsewhere, they need to have a certain standard of qualification in order to help frontline doctors. If they lack experience or if they do not have the necessary qualifications, that means we need to provide training and enhance supervision, which may pose a heavy burden on the frontline practicing doctors. And that is why we have to introduce certain requirements. We're talking about some 300 plus applications, but about 100 came from the first year when it was first introduced. Because it was the first year it was introduced, not many doctors understood the requirements, and of the 160 plus applications, some of the doctors did not quite understand the requirements, and some of these applicants couldn't even meet the basic registration requirements. The other hurdle is language requirement, because Cantonese is the spoken language in Hong Kong, and if an interpreter is required for a Putonghua speaking doctor, it may not really help frontline doctors. So language requirement is another hurdle. As for specialist qualification, the standard should be comparable to the intermediate exam of the Hong Kong Academy of Medicine. And we do consult the Hong Kong AM on the specialist qualification, and they would tell us whether the qualification of the applicant is recognized by them. And this is the approach that we have been taking. In the past 2 or 3 years, there have been better understanding of our requirements, and therefore, on average, we received 30 or 40 applications per year. But most of the reasons of rejection had to do with the language requirement or that their specialist qualifications are not comparable to our qualifications. How about mainland doctors? It's easy for Australian and UK doctors, but what about mainland doctors? It's true that they do not have a system that the Hong Kong AM recognizes. So for mainland specialists, the point is the specialist qualification is not really recognized by the colleges of the Hong Kong AM. We therefore cannot consider that the requirement has been satisfied. But in one case, the mainland doctor has actually emigrated to Canada and has gone through all the exams in Canada. And if the specialist qualification in Canada is comparable to our requirement, then he can also get the registration. So it has to do with his specialist qualification, whether it's comparable to our standards. Mr. Jeremy Tam. Having heard Dr. Pierre Chan, I'd like to further clarify some points about this profession, because we're not familiar with them. Let's say if somebody or a medical student graduates from CUHK or Hong Kong U, and then further acquires a specialist qualification overseas, then when this doctor comes back to practice in Hong Kong, would he be regarded as a local doctor or a non-local doctor with limited registration? Now, this question is very clear. If the student graduates from the medical colleges in Hong Kong, then he will automatically be registered in Hong Kong. As for the specialist qualification, it will have to be vetted by the Hong Kong AM. That's true. Whereas for locally graduated local medical student, he will be automatically be registered. I think there is some confusion here, because according to this table, there are different countries of origins on the basis of where the doctor has been practicing for 3 years. But let's say if a doctor obtains a qualification in a country, but then obtains a specialist qualification in the UK and practices for 3 years, then it will be put in this table. But my understanding is that you do not care where the doctor obtains the first medical qualification. That's how we read this HA table. Well, I want to clarify. I graduate from a medical college in Beijing University, and then I moved on to Canada to practice as a doctor for 10 years. And would you consider the fact that this doctor has practiced in Vancouver for 10 years and that the doctor will be allowed to practice with limited registration here? He will be allowed to apply. Right, and then in the table, he will be put under the column of Canada, because the first degree, although the first degree was obtained from medical school in the mainland. All right, then that's all. That's all right. But let's say for Hong Kong U and CUHK, for Table A and Table B on page 14 of the English paper, let's say Hong Kong U and then UK 9 doctors. Does it mean that you take the same approach in categorizing these doctors, or are you suggesting that they actually graduated there?
Professor Lau, you raised your hand. Let me clarify. This will not do. It is because he graduates in Beijing and then he practices in Canada. However, if he complies with the qualification of the intermediate exam for specialty, and if he reaches a level satisfying the intermediate exam, then the HA will still not allow it. He has to go through specialist training. I think what our colleagues are saying, it's really about the first medical degree. If it is attained on the mainland and this person goes on to other countries to practice or to study for a specialty, then how will you categorize him vis-a-vis country of origin? I'd like to clarify that the HA's requirement is higher than that of the 2 universities. I'll explain that later. No, Chairman, I'm not talking about this. I'm talking about the table on page 11. No, please, hear me out. The 2 universities do not require the level of a specialty intermediate exam. That is a requirement of the HA, and therefore there must be a statement saying where this person gets the specialty intermediate exam. but the universities have different requirements. The two cannot be compared directly. But look at this table, the UK. Does it mean that this person reads a medical degree in UK? Are you referring to the Hong Kong U table? Yes. Dr. Zhang, do you have the figure? Now, I cannot say anything on behalf of the universities. Maybe you should refer to the universities. We have CUHK representative, not the Hong Kong U representative. Look, you don't have to worry. I am not going to limit you to 5 minutes. Chairman, Professor Chan from CUHK is here, and we can use CUHK as an example, and Dr. Chan or Professor Chan can explain it to you. Okay, Professor Chan, do you have a table including mainland China for CU Hong Kong? Yes. Please turn to page 14. The table on CUHK, 13 from the UK. Can you explain what it means to CUHK? Thank you, Chairman. I'll come back to the table on page 12, but let me talk about how CUHK employs doctors with limited registration and the principles that we use. There are two main principles. First of all, experienced academics. They are senior doctors. They are very experienced in their own specialty, and then they come to the CUHK to work. They will apply their expertise to research and also teaching students. They will contribute a lot to clinical practice as well. And secondly, also a very important principle, and that is to train specialists. The CUHK will have cooperative agreements with other places, and we will receive or accept specialists from other countries. They will have the relevant expertise and also clinical experience, and then they will take part in training, and then after training they will go back to their organizations. And then when they study in Hong Kong, the specialist doctors will follow and learn from senior or experienced specialist doctors. These are the second category. Okay, coming back to the table on page 14. This table will include both experienced academics and specialist trainee doctors. Members refer to the Section A of the MRO, and under B it says there should be one acceptable overseas qualification. And in fact, we refer to the place they receive their training. So does it mean that this table of CUHK would indicate where the doctors got their first medical degree? Even if it is a very experienced doctor, say he graduates in the UK and then he goes to the US for 30-odd years and then he comes to Hong Kong, he is still listed under UK. And then mainland China, 10. And it only talks about the first degree obtained by the relevant doctors. So, Dr. Pierre Chen, I think you are clear now. Everyone is clear, right? Dr. Chen, second round. Wait. Hi. Dr. Zhang, I'd like to ask you this question. I'd like you to clarify something. I'm referring to paper 02, page 6, please. I'd like the HA or Dr. Zhang to say something about the degrees held. And that is about the training in a certain country. Do you have any difficulty tackling this? Well, no, but you may have to give the information after the meeting. But we have time, actually. I believe you have the information. When the Hong Kong AM gives, or MC Hong Kong gives the approval, I'm sure you have the relevant information to rely on. Okay. About Dr. Zhang's reply, I'd like to ask questions. I'm using the same paper. Give me a moment. page 4, let's say. No. Give us a moment. There is no table on page 4. No, I'm not referring to a table. Let's say this, page 2. Let's read page 2. Para 4. Let us look at the legal requirements for limited registration. There are 5 points. The first round of questions is about registration and experience in overseas countries, and we invite them to come and give us a hand. That is what is limited registration. But then under limited registration, there are 5 points. Please refer to item E or para 5, the 5th line. It says, as at the end of June 2017, 3 doctors employed by CU Hong Kong and 1 by Hong Kong U granted limited registration did not meet the requirements under section 14A, 2C or D. And then let's skip a few lines. And then the 3rd line from the bottom. 3 doctors did not continue with their overseas registration. What should I ask? First of all, supposing the law empowers the medical council to circumvent this, but supposing they do not comply with section 14A of MRO and item D, that is to be registered with a medical authority outside Hong Kong, what kind of doctor should we regard him to be? Say I don't renew my license in Hong Kong, but I have Australian specialty or specialist qualification, and I go for limited registration in Australia. So what kind of a doctor am I? A Hong Kong doctor or an Australian doctor? Do you understand my question? That is para 5, the last few paragraphs. There are a few doctors who do not fully meet section 14A of Cap 161, and these doctors do not satisfy all the 5 points of eligibility. These doctors no longer have overseas registration with the relevant overseas medical authorities. In other words, he is not a doctor anywhere else, but through limited registration, he has a license in Hong Kong. How do you view this? Secondly, and should we regard this one as a mainland doctor or Australian doctor? Because, in fact, the doctors do not have that overseas registration anymore. Or is he a Hong Kong doctor with limited registration? Okay, to make it simple, Mr. Sun, I think, yes, I got the question. And in fact, he is asking about what future these 3 doctors have. First of all, I'd like to say that the MCHK follows the law to the letter. It talks about the 5 points, and then the MC also says it has discretion even if they do not comply with C or D. This is the first point. Secondly, the 3 doctors you mentioned work at the 2 universities, and if you go to pages 13 and 14, you will see that they are here to receive training. They must have somewhere to receive medical training. Now, if he is trained in the UK, he will fall under the column for UK. So I like to say the MC does follow the law to decide whether approval will be given. No, I mean what he is asking is that under para 5, now if he has been trained in the UK, no, how do you view these doctors? Because they no longer have any overseas registration with overseas medical authority. Well, this is about registration, but the place where they are trained is still very clear. My understanding about CU and Hong Kong U is that if he is trained in the UK, even if he doesn't have registration in the UK, he will still be grouped under UK. Let me say a little more. I know that you may have difficulty with these jargon. Let me use a not so appropriate analogy. Say I get a driver's license in Hong Kong and I apply for an international driver's license to drive overseas. I won't want to apply for a driver's license overseas, so I would use an international driver's license. However, if I don't renew my driver's license in Hong Kong, meaning I don't have any driver's license from Hong Kong anymore, you do not have the original license, and then I only use a limited driver's license and drive overseas. Now, I don't know whether this is a good enough analogy, but this is how we should understand it. And my question was, so what you mean is, since they do not have any more overseas registration, and he is not a registered doctor, why do we still give them limited registration in Hong Kong? No, the administration already answered you. Under 161, Cap 161, under 14A, the MCHK is empowered. But for local registration, there is no exemption. But there is this exemption for limited registration, indeed. But I'm pointing out that this is a loophole. But this is allowed under the law. Mr. Sun is correct. Well, I need to clarify what you are talking about because you are still asking the same question. Well, Mr. Sun is correct, and I would confirm that he is correct. But I'm just trying to really get to the bottom of this and clarify this. Mr. Sun, do you think this creates a loophole? Because the MCHK can actually do this. Well, I don't think you should describe it as a loophole, but if you want to know how it operates, well, these are the minority cases, really, and there is discretion. In fact, I can ask Professor Lau, the chairman of the MC, I think he can explain. Normally speaking, when MC approves or not limited registration for a doctor, say if the application is from the two universities, we will consider a few things. Apart from the eligibility, we want to know why the faculties of medicine need these doctors and require limited registration for them. Now, what do you mean by Western medical practice? In Hong Kong, it's very difficult to define what that practice is. Our understanding is, as long as you contact patients directly or indirectly, and you treat patients' diseases, then it is a practice. I can give you some example. Say a psychiatrist may not be in direct contact with the patient. What he does is just to sit down and listen to the patient, and then he does a psychological analysis for him. And then second example, supposing a doctor ask another doctor how he should treat a patient, and if the second doctor gives his opinion, he is already practicing. So it can be direct or indirect, and it's still called a practice. At the two universities, it is different from the HA because HA provides service. The two universities talks about teaching, science and research, and also medical services. Very often, teaching and research would require direct or indirect contact with patients. Say, a doctor may need to seek a letter of consent from a patient or gives opinion about a patient. We believe that doctor needs limited registration in order to do it because it is part of medical practice. When applications are received, we have to consider all these matters. What is the doctor required to do? What will be the monitoring like? Will he be watched over by senior doctors? It is clear that these are exceptional examples. They are a rare minority. The MCHK, if it feels that there is a genuine need, then approval will be given. Next member, Dr. K.K. Kwok. Thank you, Chair. Two questions, please. There has just been one from the mainland so far. That is mainland and then practicing in Canada. That should be the only one, is that right? I like confirmation about that. Secondly, I can see that in 1964, under promulgations 3 and 4, is it that there's still a batch working here, or have they all left? That is about promulgations 3 and 4. Dr. Zhang, there are 2. No, can I clarify the question? That is, promulgations 3 and 4, this is about pre-1964. Are you referring to the paper? I'm referring to page 3. Page 3. The footnotes 1 and 2. Are they still working here if they have been invited under promulgations 3 and 4? Para 6, there is a table. You can see that under promulgations 3 and 4, well, number 3 and 4, there are still some people. As at the end of June 2017, 24 under number 3, 11 under number 4. They were here in Hong Kong before 1964. They are from the mainland, meaning they are not at the HA. Does it mean they are working in clinics for certain groups or organizations, but their number will decrease? It won't be increased. I'd like to ask about private practice for doctors with limited registration in Hong Kong. I understand the present practice is they should see private patients for less than 10% of the time that they are in Hong Kong. Now, for the public and their perception, you give them limited registration. This is a special arrangement. Shouldn't they be here to meet the public's expectations? Seeing private patients should not be their objective. I can give you an example. In fact, all our public service is inadequate. Talking about any specialty at all, people are waiting for 1 year to 3 years to be seen. If we ask these doctors to come in to tackle the long waiting time, which is 1 year to 3 years, then unless the waiting time will be as short as 1 month or 2 months, otherwise, why is it that when public system patients are waiting for 1 to 3 years, and yet doctors with limited registration can still have spare time to see private patients? What is the logic?
Mrs. Sun, I will say something and then ask Dr. Jiang or the professor to say something. For HA doctors with limited registration, there's a system. I'm talking about the 2 universities. According to the rules promulgated by the MCHK, these doctors can only work in designated areas. And if they are to see private patients, it's no more than 10% of their time. I'm just talking about an issue of fairness. We hire these doctors because there is a big demand. Look at the current situation, which is very bad with the flu, and all of these people have to chip in to clear the backlog. So how come we still allow? By allowing, we are encouraging, allowing these people to do this. I think we should wait when patients in the HA system or in the public system do not need to wait for 1 to 3 years, because limited registration is approved without examination. So you must look at the service need and also the qualification of the doctor. And the focus of our service is to serve those patients who cannot afford to to pay for private service. So I think one of the conditions of limited registration should be that they will be devoted to service in the public sector. And maybe the professor can say something. For example, in the case of CUHK, do you encourage your teaching doctors to spend 10% of the time on private patients? Well, their job is mainly about work in the teaching hospital and in the teaching. But it's not just teaching. We are also responsible for research and clinical services. Sometimes senior doctors may need to carry out teaching or research duties in other hospitals. For example, if the patients' conditions are such that they are not suitable for the transportation to the teaching hospital. So sometimes these doctors would go to a private hospital or will be arranged to provide service to private patients. This will ensure that they would get in touch with the cutting-edge medical knowledge and applications. According to the MCHK guidelines, doctors with limited registration, if assigned to treat private patients, the time spent will not be more than 10% of his time. Whether full registration or limited registration doctors, they are treated the same by CUHK. There are clear guidelines to regulate their participation in seeing private patients so that they would comply with the strict rules of the Medical Council and the university. I work in CUHK. There are clear rules. And there is a very well-established monitoring system. Doctors who are seeing private patients are senior doctors. Why is there a need to allow this? Two major reasons. Professors and senior doctors in the medical faculty are very specialized doctors. When other doctors do not have the expertise, these especially doctors will handle some difficult cases. That's why sometimes private hospitals would invite medical professors to treat some patients. And also through research and innovation in the medical science, doctors outside the universities may need to get assistance from medical professors, for example, endoscopic service. It was developed in this CUHK, and then we will have to teach doctors outside universities, train them so that they can work on it independently. If we have new skills and we need to let other doctors acquire the same, we'll have to teach doctors in private practice. If you say you can only treat patients in the public system, but there may be urgent cases. I was invited on some occasions to treat some patients in private hospitals suffering from serious hemorrhage because I was experienced in treating this. I can only get some information from past records of Medical Council. There were meetings, and there was a lot of discussion. In some cases, private patients required the service of doctors in the universities to treat them, and according to previous records, no teaching staff or no medical staff of have spent more than 10% of the time, so it was drawn at 10%. For example, for surgeons, I can only go out to do this if invited by another surgeon. That's a very stringent set of rules. I don't know the rules of Hong Kong U, but I want to say that sometimes private patients also require the service of doctors in the universities. Thank you for your explanation. Why is it that there's no one from Hong Kong U? I don't know. I don't know why we only have someone from CUHK. Some members asked for the attendance of H8 representatives, and today we also have someone from CUHK. Last time it was Dr. Chen who asked for the attendance of someone from the Medical Council, and I did ask him whether they would be here. They would have to attend our future meetings as well, and it was said it was to be one-off. So now we have so many outside experts. Let's discuss all the relevant issues. So my question for Mr. Sun, did you extend the invitation to Hong Kong U, or is it CUHK is more friendly? You know, I'm a member of the CUHK Council. Last time the members wanted to invite a representative from the HA, and we took the initiative to invite the Medical Council chairman so that we can better answer your questions. And also took one more step to see whether time will allow the two universities to send representatives. So you did invite them. Yeah, and Professor Chan said it was okay time-wise. Well, you can pursue Dr. Gabriel Leung for a response. Dr. Kwok asked a question, and that is whether the universities are encouraging their teaching staff, medical staff, to treat private patients and instead of patients in the private system. And Professor Lau is saying that these doctors may have expertise which may be required by some private patients. Ms. Claudia Mo. Last time we had a public hearing, and when Dr. Leung Ka Lau said at the very end that these doctors with limited registrations, if they created problems, of course they will have to be held responsible for problems that they have created, and those who have decided to hire them should also be held responsible. I think read between the lines, we know what he was driving at. We've been told that these doctors of limited registration are doing certain things for Hong Kong, and we have a very clear explanation given by the CUHK. These doctors are teaching in the medical faculties of the university. Why is it that they can spend 10% of their time on private patients? I want to clarify a point that they are not actually running a private clinic outside the universities. And secondly, how do they charge their patients? Is it free? And that is that they are just doing assignment from the universities. If we have someone from the Hong Kong University, we'll be able to clarify the picture. We haven't put this question to CUHK on the question of charges. Would the doctor be allowed to pocket the fees if they cooperate with a private doctor in private practice? What would he get? And I have to stress that when a doctor tries to save someone, it's irrespective of race or background. I'm not saying that if you are a patient is in a private hospital, he or she should not be saved. So is it voluntary work? Or would there be a charge? It's the 10% of his or her time, not more than 10% can be spent on private patients. Well, Professor Lau represents the medical council, but he also works at CUHK. So Professor Chan, can you tell us when a doctor with limited registration provides service to a private patient, how much is the charge? And would a part of that goes to CUHK? Please inform Ms. Mo. There is a limitation on time, not more than 10%, on the in the monitoring of these outside practice. There's no distinction between full registration doctors and limited registration doctors. There are rules governing whether someone can go out to treat private patients, and also it's only done on the basis of invitation by someone else. On fees and charges, they will follow certain mechanism of private hospitals, but all the payment will be collected through the medical faculty, and not by the doctor himself. And we are not providing a pro bono work. There are clear guidelines that require certain fees and charges to be collected. When the revenue is collected by the medical council, we have a mechanism involving professors on how to utilize them. Is the revenue share? Yes. Part of it will go to the medical council, to the department, or to research work, and the professor too. According to regulation, a small part will go to the professor. Do you give some guidelines to doctors with limited registration? Do you have a booklet? Well, the rules are very clear. If there is a booklet on this, please give us a copy. Please ask if a copy can be given to us. If it cannot be provided, please also let us know. I have a follow-up question. If someone is assigned, he will be going out to treat private patients, not for patients in public hospitals. Whether it's a limited registration or full registration doctors, they are all in the same team responsible for teaching and research. If they are engaged in a private treating private patients, well, they have patients in the public system, Queen Mary Hospital and Prince of Wales Hospital. You have used 1/3 of my time. Well, that's okay. I'm not limiting members to 5 minutes of speaking time. Some members have spoke up to 12 minutes. I have 2 more questions. On the one hand, HA is short of 300 doctors, and second, more than 300 applications seeking limited registration were rejected. Of course, if they're up to scratch, you should reject their applications. But if a school, if you are admitting students to a school and you are getting a lot of applicants who are not up to the required standards, you should review why this is the case. And I have a mainland friend who's a graduate in Western medicine, and that particular friend has practiced on the mainland for a long time, but he has failed to pass the licensure examination. The main complaint is that they don't have the requisite English language. Maybe is it because of this? Well, we have had a number of discussion about the 300 applicants. In the first year, the HA rejected the 300 plus applications. I'm not talking about the HA. I'm talking about the public hospital. I'm not asking about the two universities. I'm talking about the public sector, public healthcare sector. Dr. Zhang, let me explain. 300 applicants were rejected. Half of them are related to the first year, because that was the first time we did it. The applicants did not quite understand the requirements, so the applicants come from various backgrounds, and most of them could not fulfill our requirements. And then after that year, we would just reject 20 to 30 applications per year. They would they were not able to satisfy certain requirements. For example, the intermediate examination of Hong Kong AM. Some did try to see if their qualification would be considered equivalent. We did check with the Hong Kong Academy of Medicine, and many failed. And we also require the applicant to speak Cantonese, and he may be able to say good morning and not more. So when we conduct the interview over the telephone, we already knew that they would not qualify under this head. So in the past few years, the numbers are sort of steady. So mainly it's because of the lack of suitable qualification and a language problem. And you are talking about mainland. Ms. Mo was talking about mainland doctors not having the requisite competence in English. If there is an Australian doctor who can only speak English, so he can forget it. Oh, no, apart from 3 specialties: anesthesia, pathology, and radiology. Because they don't need to talk to patients. For these 3 specialties, Cantonese is not required. Yes, apart from these 3 specialties, they need to talk to patients. Otherwise, we need to hire interpreters. Maybe you hire interpreters, and these doctors, patients stand to benefit.
I wish to respond to the member's question on the low passing rate of the licentiate exam. There are several parts to this exam. One is multiple choice question, and there is a specified percentage of all the disciplines that a general doctor is supposed to cover, pediatrics and autopsy and other areas. And we require that no exemption be given. And you should know that there are institutions that would help students prepare for the exam. For the multiple choice question, the failing rate is the highest. The passing rate is about 10 or 15%. Why is the passing rate so low? We conducted a number of analyses. For Hong Kong students, they spent 6 years to go through more than 10 exams, but now you conduct the exam on just in one go, and the textbooks are of this thickness, so it's really difficult to get passed in the exam in one go. That covers more than 10 such textbooks. For recent graduates, according to our analysis, the passing rate is higher, but for more senior doctors, they have left the medical college for some time and they may not remember the things so well, and there may be technological advances which they're not familiar with. And we've conducted a lot of analyses. But it is the government's requirement that there should be no exemption. So for this part of the exam is relatively difficult, and I fully agree with you. Second part to the question is, or second part of the exam is medical English, and local medical students would be exempted from this exam because the passing rate for this subject is usually 90%. There is not much difficulty in here because we require medical English knowledge because all the medical records in Hong Kong are recorded in English. So you need to know the terminology. So is it the case that they cannot pass the medical English exam? No, the passing rate is 90%. It's not about this part. For multiple choice questions, candidates can choose either to answer in Chinese or English. For the third part, they can also choose English, Putonghua, or Cantonese. And that is a clinical exam. The passing rate is about 30 to 40%. On the whole, the low passing rate has to do with medical knowledge. That is the first part of the exam. Because after you get a doctorate degree, you may not do so well in certificate examination. Or for example, if you've taken a certain specialty in the university, and if I asked you to take all the exams of physics, chemistry, etc., it would be difficult for you. Can I suggest that this exam is unnecessarily harsh? Well, I don't know whether this is this really has to do with the medical council. But for medical students, they need to pass all these exams. So why is it that for non-local students, they don't need to fulfill all the requirements? Because it will be unfair. But because of the very low passing rate, in the past, exams would only be held once every year. After I assumed this post as chairman, I have sought funding from the government such that we have 2 exams per year. And after revising for exam, if a student fails in that exam, then in a short period of time, the student can have a retake of the exam. Right, so the student can get a pass in 8 papers and then sit in the next exam for the remaining papers. Let's say if I fail in the discipline of and if in another discipline, then in another specialty, then what should happen? But I don't think this is relevant because ultimately you need to ask the 2 medical colleges about the standard of those exams. But I heard that the syllabus is different. Well, the 2 medical colleges hold exams, and usually the licentiate exam is also consistent with those exams, exit exams. Once you get the license in Hong Kong, you get full registration as a general physician, and you can start general practice. And you're not confined to
如果第二啲科唔合格嘅話咧，我點可以放心俾你去
orthodontist. But then you need to have at least a certain level of general knowledge.
外看啦，咁啊，所以即係睇文件嘅時候咧，就
Mr. Kim Yun. I do have some questions after reading the paper, and I hope to seek enlightenment from you. As a member of the general public, we're concerned about the quality of doctors. For doctors with limited registration, we hope that they are of quality so as to reassure us, and I'm referring to paragraph 4 of the paper in relation to requirements of limited registration. It comes under 5 points, A to E. I understand that this is the established arrangement, but some of these requirements are quite vague. For example, point C, he or she has had adequate and relevant full-time post-qualification clinical experience. As to what is meant by adequate, as a layman, I do hope that you can explain in greater detail to me. Point D, he or she is registered with a medical authority outside Hong Kong. We understand that outside Hong Kong, most jurisdictions will have a medical authority. So what is called an authority? I'd like to know more about that as well. And further on in the paper, paragraph 11, I want to know whether this is relevant, because paragraph 11 refers to a task force of limited registration scheme set up by the hospital authority specifically for vetting the qualifications and eligibility of the applicants, and there are 3 requirements, A to C. Does it mean that these 3 points are related to the word adequate that I mentioned? Or is it that there are other requirements? For example, intermediate examination, as mentioned just now, what kind of exam is it? And how do we ensure the standard of examination? Point B, at least 3 years working experience in hospitals after completion of the internship. Comparing to the previous paragraph, a medical authority outside Hong Kong, is it the same requirement? Or does it mean that as long as there is working experience in a hospital, country of origin is not a consideration? Because ultimately the approval comes from the medical council. So I want to know whether the requirements laid down by the hospital authority and the medical council are consistent. Mr. Zhang, would you take the question? Well, let me take the question about hospital authority. The objective of the hospital authority is to recruit doctors with non-local doctors with limited registration to help alleviate the burden of frontline doctors in Hong Kong. And if the applicants meet the qualification and experience requirements, they will do a lot in helping frontline doctors, and that is why we have introduced these requirements. Professor Lau, in a moment, can further elaborate on the requirements of the hospital authority. But basically, those doctors should first of all fulfill the registration requirements of non-local doctors laid down by the MCHK before meeting the HA's requirements. Namely, there should be 3 years working experience. The period should not be too short, or else we'll need to provide extra training on those doctors, and we'll also need to supervise closely his work, and this will not be alleviating the burden on frontline doctors. The other point is that the qualification should be comparable to the intermediate exam of the Hong Kong Academy of Medicine. This is for the purpose of quality assurance, because for local doctors, they also receive specialist training. If there is a specialist qualification comparable to the intermediate examination, it can provide assurance. The third requirement is that the majority of patients in Hong Kong speak Cantonese. We therefore require the doctors to speak fluent Cantonese and English as well. Professor Lau, anything to add? You can see that the Medical Council has different requirements on local doctors as the HAs, because for Medical Council, the objective is for the doctors to practice at the front line, and therefore we do require the doctors to reach a certain standard, and the requirements therefore are quite different from the HAs. I can say that the MCHK's requirements are more stringent even, such that they can start work without supervision by a senior doctor. The reason is that around the world there are different training there are different systems for training medical doctors. In the UK, they have a 5 or 6 year system with 1 year of internship, whereas in the US it's 4+4, 4 years of clinical practice and 4 years of medical school. In the mainland, they have different systems. They have 3, 4, 5, up to 8 years of training. It's very complex. So the MCHK must decide what the minimum standard should be. And the minimum standard, in our view, is that the standard should be comparable to that of a local medical student. So that is the minimum standard to practice medicine safely in Hong Kong. This is the standard that we set. So that means the candidate should have received sufficient medical training and clinical training, because for a local doctor, he gets a license only after 5 years of studies and 1 year of internship. So the purpose is to align the standards on non-local doctors with local doctors. Mr. Yip, follow up? In that case, my understanding on point A is that you suggest the level of training or qualification should be comparable to that provided to a local medical student. We call it the minimum standard. The minimum standard to practice medicine safely in Hong Kong. And in fact, for the 2 medical colleges in Hong Kong, the standards or the requirements are higher. When it comes to the licentiate exam for specialists, there would be an adjunct examiner and a local examiner. And when we discuss with the examiners, we would tell them that we'd like to achieve international standards. But the minimum standard is to practice medicine safely in Hong Kong, and the examiners are well aware of our standards. So even for the level of our licentiate exam, it should be recognized worldwide, and that is why for each specialty we invite experts to be examiners. So you talk about the minimum requirement when it comes to medicine. I think that it's a bit alarming. All right, this is a safety, minimum safety requirement. I think this is an acceptable minimum safety standard. Well, medicine is very different from other disciplines. The minimum requirement for the discipline of medicine is that a patient's conditions must not deteriorate, or the patient must not die because of your medical procedure. So the exam of for a medical student is quite different from other exams, because you would fail right away if you do something wrong, because the patient could very well die because of what you do. No matter what you do, you must not compromise the health of a patient. Sorry, I'd like to follow up on another point. Point B. Well, we have a similar internship requirement for local doctors. Is there any quality assurance requirement, or that as long as the work experience and the internship period satisfies your requirement, that will do? We have a standard for local doctors, and we have a very close supervision on our interns. I can say it's very the supervision is very stringent. As for candidates from other countries, it's difficult to comment because they come from different countries. If the doctor is granted a license in their country of origin, this will be one of our factors of consideration. But the standards and the requirements in each and every country may be different, and that is why a candidate must take the licentiate exam and complete the one-year internship in Hong Kong first. Next, Mr. Paul Chair. I fully understand what the Professor Lau said, the minimum safety requirement, and yet at the same time, I find myself unable to answer the public's questions. Well, supposedly, a doctor undergoes a longer period of training than lawyers because their work is more crucial than a doctor, because lives are involved. Whereas for an error of a lawyer, somebody would be sent to jail. For the for legal profession, the difference in different countries is not really substantial, but not the same for the medical profession. Why is it so difficult for non-local doctors to pass the licentiate exam in Hong Kong? I was interested in listening to your response on the low passing rate of the licentiate exam, and I can say that indeed if I am asked to take the law school exams again, I could very well fail. Well, even our really talented students could fail the general education or liberal studies subject. So how do you strike a balance between safeguarding public health and addressing the acute shortage of doctors? Well, let's say we have the less urgent medical procedures. In the case of the legal profession, we have paralegals, but we also have paramedics in the medical profession. I want to know whether you can sort of relax the standard a little bit for the frontline work. I'd like the professor to supplement. Second point, Professor Chen mentioned this point, and Ms. Claudia Mo also follow up on this question of 10% time for private patients. I want to know how this figure has come by, and also for private patients, is it that even when we're talking about doctors in the two medical colleges, even if the patient is not in the private sector but in the public sector without means, does it mean that the patient will not be attended by these doctors from the two medical colleges?
Because I would have thought that these experts are not here to make money, but if there are certain cases with special pathology, and if these experts would like to have the chance to research into those, then they should be seeing these patients instead of trying to make money in 10% of their time after work. What is the philosophy behind this? The first question, Professor Lau. I have been involved in medical education for many years. I only have one philosophy. I don't believe there are doctors with two different standards practicing in Hong Kong. In other words, if you don't meet the minimum standard, I wouldn't feel reassured for you to practice in Hong Kong. It is impossible for you to see a patient and then another one would have to vet whether you are up to standard because you have got a full license. Meaning, no matter what kind of a disease it is, you should be able to work as a doctor. We won't give a license to anyone who is not up to standard to practice in Hong Kong. That is something I don't believe in, unless honorable members can help us resolve the issue. Sorry, let me cut you short. Well, other countries also have the same requirement. Maybe US, UK, Canada, they may think that their standards are more stringent than Hong Kong. I think what you say is also true in other countries. Well, you may make it sound grand, but we have to balance the actual situation. Other countries would not think that they are at a standard lower than Hong Kong. So what do you think about this? Well, what is important is whether we can accept someone who is really substandard. And I'm not only talking about UK, US, and Canada. Look at the people who come to sit the examination. They may be from Bangladesh, the Philippines, Indonesia, African countries. They come from everywhere. If you can't maintain the standard and insist on maintaining the standard, and if you accept anybody at all, well, yes, there will be more so-called doctors in Hong Kong. But they are so-called doctors. Would they be doing a service or disservice to Hong Kong? Sorry, Chairman. I'd like to really follow up. That takes me to another question. Maybe you can say I'm a busybody. Why is it that in the past we could accept doctors from different countries with different standards? Is it that we are raising our standard with the passage of time? And let's not talk about Australian or European countries. We used to allow dentists trained in the Philippines to practice in Hong Kong. But is it that we have come to a stage where we wouldn't accept that other countries' standards can catch up with the Hong Kong standard? I think that is a question for the administration. Like in Singapore, there is a list which universities will be found acceptable. But Hong Kong doesn't have that list yet. Perhaps that should be a question for the administration. Mr. Sun, I still have another question for Professor Chan about the 10% rate. Under the MRO, we have got these requirements that there should be a licentiate exam and the principles for that exam. It is not requirements set by the administration. The MCHK only acts according to the law. But I can share with you that when we had the tripartite platform, we devoted a session to overseas experience. We understand the Hong Kong arrangement may not be the same as that in overseas. As Professor Lau said, the Singaporean model is more open, is more relaxed. It can designate certain universities, and as long as you graduate from them, you can practice in Singapore. And then in mid-range, we have Australian model. You can sit the exam, but if you work in a remote area, you will have to comply with relaxed standards. So every place looks at its own needs, but then there are always standards. The crux is what the law states, and the MCHK follows the law. If we want to follow the Singaporean model, we need another piece of legislation. Professor Chan, the members asked whether HA patients would not be seen by expert doctors with limited registration. That won't be the case because those working at CUHK would be working mostly in the medical school and also in the teaching hospital of Prince of Wales Hospital. But we also apply to the NT East cluster. If patients go to HA and if they are affected by rare cases, and our doctors with limited registration can also attend to them. But we do not regard these as public patients. What about Tuen Mun? Will they go to Tuen Mun? If there is a patient in Tuen Mun requiring your specialist doctor to help, you will go there? Well, yes, especially in the surgical field, because those expertise is very much subspecialized. However, if it is a private patient, he doesn't want to wait 1.5 years. He doesn't go to a private hospital but a public hospital. However, he would pay a private fee. Are they regarded as private patients? I am adding to the question because I'm thinking that this might just happen. But I don't think this happens often. At the hospital, we have our team. And if there is a need, we would not classify the patients. We have one team for crash call, for example. No, I'm just thinking, if a patient comes to a public hospital, he is not having an acute disease, so he has to wait for 1.5 years. But he can go to a public hospital paying a private patient's fee, and then doctors will not ask you to wait anymore, right? The thing is, I'm talking about patients who are not affected by acute diseases. And I'm asking you, if they pay a private patient's fee, will they be counted within these 10% if they go to a public hospital? Well, you were talking about acute, but I was saying that we would attend to rare and difficult cases. These are included. The type of patients you described would be included in this 10%. Mr. Paul Jett, is your question answered? I'm a little confused. So you mean the 10% would only mean patients who pay a private patient's fee. However, if the service is free or only a public service fee is paid, you would still allow your experts to see them and they are not regarded as within the 10%. Well, I will say again, our clinical professors or academics, 65% of their time is devoted to service. I like to state clearly that within the HA system, well, I am a university doctor. I use a significant part of my time to provide clinical service. We are very much integrated with the HA. The Hong Kong U works in Queen Mary Hospital and Hong Kong cluster, and we work in PWH and NT East. And then 65% plus 10%, so maximum 75% for frontline clinical work. No. They are saying these doctors also involved in science and research. And they are saying at least 65% of the time is devoted to clinical work. I think Professor Lau also said that by means of clinical work, it is not just seeing the patient. We may also teach around a hospital bed, and we may want to get the patient's consent in order to do science and research, and we may also explain clinical procedures. You may not regard this as curing a patient, but it's part of it. But he was talking about the 10%. How do you count the 10%? Do you count it on the basis of 8 hours a day, 5 days a week? Or do you count it on the basis of 24 hours per day? I can only answer about the case in CU Hong Kong. Internally, we use the stringent standard of 8 hours a day, and we view it on the basis of a quarter, meaning 3 months, and we count 52 hours for 1 quarter. Okay. So not more than 52 hours in 3 months spent on seeing private patients. So is it 65% plus 10 or... Sorry, the 65% is another thing. Sorry for confusing you. They are talking about clinical work in public hospitals. And as for private patients, it would not be more than 10%, and he has already told you the exact number of hours, not more than 52 in a quarter. Mr. Leung Yu-chung, one main point of this law is that you can now allow limited registration for 3 years instead of just 1 year. I think you are trying to appeal to doctors. Well, there is actually no relaxation. It's just that you can keep them for longer. Since we have the whole team here, I'd like to ask this question. Have you done any survey? Because you were talking about CUHK. You say they do science and research and also clinical work, and they can also see patients. Do you think they like the arrangement? I think they already like it if it is just 1 year, and it seems if there is almost automatic renewal after 1 year if nothing untoward happens. So do you really want to put it at 3 years at the outset? I'm asking about the universities and the HA or the MC Hong Kong. Have you done a survey amongst those who have come to Hong Kong? Were they happy with the arrangement? Do you think 3 years would be an important factor, or would it be the work nature or working hours that would matter more to them? Dr. Zhang. This is something raised by the HA. We hope that the limited registration period hopefully can be extended to 3 years instead of 1 year. It is because under the present system, nothing can go beyond 1 year. But in terms of our work, we hope the doctors can come and help us. At recruitment, we can see that those who come to apply will be told that if you come here, you must apply for limited registration with the MCHK, so you can be employed by the HA and you would be retained for just 1 year. They will be told everything before they come to apply. And since we require them to have 3 years clinical experience, these people would be holding a job in their own country. They would have to give up that job. They have to come to Hong Kong to adapt to a new environment. And there is a lot of uncertainty because they can stay only for 1 year. And that is why we could only appeal to doctors who want to come here for some experience and exchange. And I can say that after working for a year, he will have to look for another job in his place of origin. Under the present system, the applicants only come here for a transition. They are prepared to stay for Hong Kong for a short while. On the average, they stay in Hong Kong for 1.7 years. Over half leave within 2 years. 75% leave within 3 years. Therefore, they just are not prepared to stay in Hong Kong. They will just be here for a short period of time. But even so, not many come to apply because they would just come to Hong Kong for a short while and then they would go back, and they don't want to give up their original job. They want to be assured that they have a job waiting for them. And it's very common for doctors to be employed on contract in overseas countries. They may complete a contract for 2-3 years and then they would come to Hong Kong and then go back to start a new contract. But of course, if they want to stay in Hong Kong, they will have to apply to the MCHK again. After changing this, we hope we'll be able to attract more doctors who do not want to come here just for a transition. We hope they can come to Hong Kong to work. Mr. Leung, well, I heard that kind of statement before. Can I ask the CUHK, have you done a survey? Because from the figures, well, I don't have the figures for CUHK, but in the past 5 years, the average is that 90% do not submit an application. Did you ask why? I find this strange. These people are already in Hong Kong and yet they don't apply. Why? Okay, if they don't come, they may think that the period of stay is too short, so they don't apply. I understand why you are trying to extend it because you want to appeal to more doctors. But what about those who are already here? Why don't they apply? Have you done a survey as to the reasons why? They have been here, they have seen Hong Kong. If they think this is a good place, there is no reason why they want to leave. As you said, unless something serious happens, you would normally automatically allow them to renew. And if you have such harsh difficulties or grave difficulties, why are you not doing a survey? Dr. Zhang is saying that now we can only attract those who come here for a short while, but he wants to attract people who want to stay for a longer time. Dr. Zhang, have you done a survey as to how many more people you can attract if you extend it to 3 years? No, I'd like to ask the CUHK. Have you done a survey with the people who have come? No, I think the HA should answer the question because the HA is making this request. No, but this will apply to both sectors. No, it may be different for the academics who do research, but the HA has made the request. Let the HA answer, and then we can ask the CUHK later. If the CUHK can do it, why is it that it is so different at the HA? Well, maybe it's because the work nature is different. Dr. Zhang? Those who succeed in applying and if they perform well, we'll invite them to renew the contract. But many of them would say, I am prepared to stay for a short period because I would like to continue my career in my place of origin. So as I said, when they come, they are psychologically prepared only to practice for a short while, to get some experience and to know Hong Kong, and in the long term, they would want to go back. This is their mindset. They would be prepared only to stay for 1 or 2 years. A very minor cohort would stay, but over half will leave within 2 years. We always invite them to stay, but they would say, no, thank you, because I want to develop my career in my place of origin. That is their wish. But some of them would say they are interested in taking the licentiate exam in Hong Kong. A few of them did so. And after that, they will be able to practice in Hong Kong as a registered doctor. And they are no longer doctors with limited registration. We have had such cases, just a few of them.
諗住做一陣嘅。
你用乜嘢嘅即係理據啲數據啦？
On what basis can you tell us that if it's 3 years, we can get another group? Well, it's just logical deduction. We cannot conduct a worldwide survey asking doctors who will come if it's 3 years. We believe it's helpful. Well, is it not wishful thinking? But in theory and logic, it can be helpful because 3 years is still a short period. Well, it doesn't matter that you don't see it that way. It's okay. They think it's helpful. You don't. On what basis that 3 years will be an attractive term, but not 1 year? I ask you for justifications. You say that if just 1 year, you attract people who are here for 1 or 2 years, and with 3 years, or would they be just here for 3 years? How can you be sure that if they are here for 3 years, they won't leave? Mr. Leung, you have repeated your question. Professor Chen has indicated his wish to say. But this is not wishful thinking. For overseas doctors, if you offer them a term of 3 years, well, it's certainly a positive factor. Of course, there are other factors, whether they are adapted, whether they are happy and satisfied, and whether the supervisors think that they are okay. If you offer an employment contract for 1 year, you don't attract a lot of people. So the contract usually lasts for 3 years, but the registration period is just 1 year. According to our experience, if you offer people a 1 year contract, you're not going to get anyone from overseas countries. So it's not really not wishful thinking. If you look at the 22nd paragraph, 22nd, very few people remain with the 2 universities for a long time. We're talking about senior people. We have a very stringent assessment system. There will be no floodgate in the case of universities. We want to attract good people. It's certainly positive to offer a 3-year contract instead of 1. Of course, we have no control over other factors. Some of them have worked in Hong Kong for 20 years. So they have to apply every year, and you don't need a survey. If you ask them whether it's better to have 3 years or 1 year, of course they would go for 3 years. We need to take a break. You have asked questions for 12 minutes. I'll give you a longer break. Let's return at 4:45.
點樣話？醫委會啲同事喺度。
We have someone from the medical council, so I would like to offer them a longer break. Our meeting will last until 6:30.